He came for a baby checkup, but the doctor CEO froze when he saw her twins, his secret daughters. Hello, my most precious, most beloved family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. If only you knew the depth of my love for you. It's the kind of love that doesn't need words, but still aches to be spoken. You are not just my viewers. You are my heartbeat, my strength, my reason to rise and give my all each day. This bond we share, it's not ordinary. It's sacred. But sometimes I quietly wonder, why do I need to ask for a simple like or comment? Isn't love supposed to answer without being called? Isn't family supposed to show up even when no one knocks? Still, I ask, not to force you, but because every like, every comment is a soft reminder that you still carry this love with you. So if your heart still beats beside mine, please write in the comments, you are not alone. Because you're not. And when you say it, you're not just telling me, you're telling every silent soul in this family that we're still together, still holding on. You are everything to me. Your presence, your support, your love, it's my treasure. If you're ever feeling lost, I want my voice to be the place you come home to. Here is the prayer I hold in my heart, just for you. May your days be painted with peace, and your nights be wrapped in warmth. May every tear find comfort, and every smile be shared with someone who sees your worth, and may your life overflow with a love so deep, it fills every silent space with light. Let's walk forward together, not just as a channel, but as souls forever connected. You are not alone, and I will never stop loving you. Dawn Kindheart stood before the imposing glass facade of Bremer Medical Center, her worn leather portfolio clutched tightly in her hands. At 29, she never imagined she would be desperate enough to apply for an administrative position. After years of dedicated teaching, but budget cuts had a way of humbling even the most passionate educators. The morning sun reflected off the building's surface, creating a kaleidoscope of light that seemed to mock her nervous energy. She had spent the previous evening rehearsing answers to potential interview questions, practicing her confident smile. In the bathroom mirror, while her 5-year-old twins, Lily and Rose, played quietly in their small apartment. The girls didn't understand why Mommy seemed so worried lately, why she stayed up late, hunched over her laptop, submitting application after application into what felt like an endless cycle of automated responses and polite rejections. "You've got this," Dawn whispered to herself, straightening her shoulders as she pushed through the revolving door into the hospital's marble-floored lobby. The scent of antiseptic and fresh flowers from the reception desk arrangements filled her nostrils, a sterile contrast to the warm chaos of her former classroom that still haunted her dreams. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt eternal. Dawn watched the numbers climb, 3rd floor, 4th floor, 5th floor, each ding bringing her closer to what she hoped would be a new beginning. She had researched Bremer Medical Center extensively, learning about their reputation for excellence in patient care and their commitment to serving the community. What she hadn't researched was the identity of their CEO, an oversight that would prove to be either fate's cruelest joke or its most beautiful gift. The receptionist, a kind-faced woman with silver hair, smiled warmly as Dawn approached. "You must be Ms. Kindheart. Mr. Bremer is waiting for you in conference room A, just down the hall, 3rd door on your right." Dawn thanked her and walked down the corridor, her heels clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that seemed to match her accelerated heartbeat. She paused outside the conference room door, took a deep breath, and knocked softly. "Come in," came a voice from inside, a voice that made her blood freeze in her veins. Dawn's hand trembled as she turned the handle and stepped into the room. Seated at the far end of a long mahogany table, reviewing what appeared to be her resume, was a man she recognized instantly despite the 6 years that had passed. His dark hair was shorter now, more professional, with distinguished touches of silver at the temples. His shoulders had broadened, his face had matured, But those grey-green eyes, those eyes she had once gazed into every morning, were unmistakably his. Jim Bremer looked up from the papers in his hands and froze. The pen he had been holding slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the table, the small sound echoing in the suddenly suffocating silence of the room. Dawn Kindheart. The name on the resume hadn't registered when he'd first reviewed it, perhaps because his mind had refused to make the connection, protecting him from hoping for something impossible. But there she was, standing in his conference room, more beautiful than his memories had preserved. Her hair was longer now, cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore a simple navy dress that accentuated her grace, and her dark eyes, those eyes that had once looked at him with such love, now regarded him with a mixture of shock, pain, and carefully constructed professional composure. "Dawn," he breathed, half rising from his chair before catching himself and sinking back down. I didn't realize—" "Mr. Bremer," Dawn said, her voice steady despite the earthquake occurring beneath her calm exterior. She moved toward the chair across from him, with measured steps, each one requiring tremendous effort. "Thank you for taking the time to interview me." The formality of her tone cut through him like a blade. This was the woman who had once whispered his name in the darkness, who had traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips while they planned their future together. Now she sat across from him like a stranger, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her resume creating a barrier between them on the polished table surface. Jim cleared his throat, struggling to regain his professional composure. "Of course. I've reviewed your qualifications and they're quite impressive. Your background in education, your experience with administrative duties—" He was rambling, filling the air with meaningless words while his mind raced with 1,000 questions. He couldn't ask. "How are you? Why did you leave? Do you ever think about us? Are you happy? Are you married?" His eyes flickered to her left hand, and he felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion when he saw no wedding ring adorning her finger. Dawn watched him struggle with the same internal chaos she was fighting. 6 years had passed since she had walked away from the man she thought she would spend her life with. 6 years since he had shattered her heart with accusations so cruel and unfounded that she still sometimes woke up from nightmares about that final, devastating conversation. Yet sitting across from him now, she found herself remembering not the pain of their ending, but the beauty of their beginning. "I'm particularly interested in the patient care coordinator position," Dawn said, her voice gaining strength as she focused on the practical matter at hand. "I believe my experience working with diverse populations and my background in communication would serve your patients well." Jim nodded, impressed despite everything by her obvious qualifications and poise. "Tell me about your approach to patient advocacy," he said, falling back into interview mode as a defense against the emotional storm brewing inside him. As Dawn began to speak about her philosophy of patient care, her passion became evident. She talked about treating every person with dignity, about being a bridge between medical professionals and families in crisis, about the importance of compassion in healthcare settings. Jim found himself genuinely engrossed in her answers, remembering why he had fallen in love with her generous heart in the first place. "During my time teaching," Dawn continued, "I worked with many families facing challenges: financial hardship, language barriers, children with special needs. I learned that sometimes what people need most isn't just professional competence, but someone who truly listens and cares about their well-being." As she spoke, Jim realized he was seeing not just the woman he had once loved, but the person she had become in their years apart. There was a depth to her now, a quiet strength that spoke of trials overcome and wisdom earned through experience. He found himself wondering what those years had been like for her, what challenges she had faced, what joys she had discovered. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering her technical skills, her availability, her salary expectations. Throughout it all, both maintained their professional facades while navigating the emotional minefield of being in the same room again. Jim found himself asking follow-up questions, not because he needed more information about her qualifications. Her resume and references spoke for themselves, but because he wasn't ready for this unexpected encounter to end. "What drew you specifically to Bremer Medical Center?" Jim asked, genuinely curious about her answer. Dawn hesitated for just a moment, her composure flickering. "Your reputation for patient-centered care," she said carefully. "I researched your community outreach programs, your sliding-scale payment options for uninsured patients. It aligns with my values about healthcare being a right, not a privilege." Jim felt something twist in his chest. Even now, even after everything, she was thinking about others, about service to those who needed it most. It was so quintessentially Dawn that he felt transported back to their college days, when she would tutor struggling students for free and volunteer at homeless shelters on weekends. That's exactly the kind of perspective we need here," he said, his professional mask slipping slightly. "Someone who understands that behind every patient file is a human being with fears, hopes, and dignity that deserves respect." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, the years dissolved. Dawn saw not the successful CEO in his expensive suit, but the idealistic medical student who had once talked passionately about changing the world through medicine. Jim saw not the poised professional applicant, but the woman who had believed in his dreams, even when he doubted himself. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious, until Dawn cleared her throat and looked down at her hands. "I should mention," she said quietly, "that I have 2 young children, twins. They're 5 years old. I want to be upfront about the fact that my schedule needs to accommodate school pickups and the occasional sick day." Jim's breath caught in his throat. Twins, 5 years old. The timeline would place their birth right around. He forced himself to respond professionally, even as his mind reeled with possibilities. "Of course, we're a family-friendly organization. Many of our employees are parents, and we understand the importance of work-life balance." Dawn nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "Their father he's not in the picture. So it's just me." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither could address directly. Jim felt a strange mixture of emotions, sympathy for the challenges she must face as a single mother, curiosity about the father of her children, and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Finally, Dawn glanced at her watch and gathered her portfolio. "I believe I've covered everything in my application," she said, rising from her chair with elegant grace. "Thank you again for your time, Mr. Bremer." Jim stood as well, his height still impressive as she remembered. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the table, 6 years of separation and unspoken words hanging between them like a gossamer web. "We'll make our decision by the end of the week," Jim said formally. "HR will contact you either." "Way," Dawn nodded and moved toward the door, but Jim's voice stopped her. "Dawn!" The way he said her name, soft and filled with something unnameable, made her turn back. Their eyes met and held, and for just an instant the years fell away, and they were young again, in love again, before everything went wrong. "Yes?" she whispered. Jim seemed to struggle with words, his jaw working silently before he finally managed. "It's good to see you again." The simple statement carried the weight of years of regret, longing, and questions that might never be answered. Dawn felt tears threaten at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Goodbye, Jim," she said softly and walked out of the conference room, leaving him standing alone with his memories and the lingering scent of her perfume, the same fragrance she had worn all those years ago. As the door clicked shut behind, Jim sank back into his chair and buried his face in his hands. He knew without question that he would hire her. Not because of her qualifications, though they were excellent, but because fate had placed her back in his life, and he wasn't going to let her walk away again. Not without understanding what had really happened between them all those years ago. Outside, in the hallway, Dawn leaned against the wall and pressed a trembling hand to her heart. The job interview had become secondary the moment she had seen Jim's face. Now she faced a terrible choice: take the position she desperately needed and work alongside the man who had broken her heart, or continue her job search and protect herself from reopening old wounds. But as she thought of Lily and Rose waiting for her at daycare, as she remembered the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table, she realized the choice had already been made. She needed this job, and if that meant facing her past every day, then she would find the strength to do it. She just prayed that strength would be enough to protect not only her heart, but the secret she had carried alone for 6 long years. The secret of 2 little girls, with their father's eyes, who didn't even know he existed. Chapter 2. The Truth About Leaving. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after the interview that had turned Dawn's carefully ordered world upside down. She was helping Lily with her reading homework, while Rose colored quietly at the kitchen table when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Ms. Kindheart, this is Jim, Mr. Bremer from Bremer Medical Center." His voice sounded different over the phone, more uncertain than the confident CEO she had faced across the conference table. "I'm calling to offer you the position of patient care coordinator, if you're still interested." Dawn's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed his words. She had spent the last 3 days oscillating between hoping for and dreading this call. Yes, I'm very interested, thank you. Can you start Monday morning? HR will email you all the details, benefits, orientation schedule, everything you need to know." There was a pause, filled with the sound of Lily practicing her sight words and Rose humming softly as she colored. Dawn could hear Jim breathing on the other end of the line, and she wondered if he was remembering as she was, another phone call 6 years ago that had changed everything. That call had come on a March evening when daffodils were beginning to push through the last of winter's snow. Dawn had been grading papers in her small apartment near the university, occasionally glancing at her phone and wondering when Jim would return from his late shift at the hospital. They had been planning to look at apartments together that weekend, larger places that might accommodate the growing family she was carrying but hadn't yet told him about. She had discovered the pregnancy 2 weeks earlier, confirmed by 3 different tests and a visit to the campus health center. The timing wasn't perfect. Jim was in his final year of medical school, matching for residency, and their relationship had already weathered the strain of his demanding schedule and her teaching responsibilities. But Dawn had been overjoyed, imagining Jim's face when she told him, picturing them as a family. The pregnancy had made her nauseated but hopeful, tired but glowing with secret happiness. She had planned to tell him over dinner that Saturday, had even made reservations at the little Italian restaurant where they'd had their first official date. She had bought a children's book about families and wrapped it carefully, planning to give it to him as a surprise way to share the news. But his phone call had come first. "Dawn?" Jim's voice had been strange that night, cold and distant in a way she'd never heard before. "We need to talk." "Of course," she had said, setting aside her papers and settling into her reading chair, the same chair where she now sat 6 years later listening to him offer her a job. "How was your day? You sound tired." "I'm not tired. Dawn, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Something in his tone had made her stomach clench with more than morning sickness. "Jim, what's wrong? You're scaring me." "How long have you been planning this?" "Planning what?" "Jim, I don't understand." His laugh had been bitter, unlike any sound she'd ever heard from the man who usually spoke to her with such tenderness. "The pregnancy, Dawn. How long have you been planning to trap me with a baby?" The words had hit her like physical blows. Dawn had dropped the phone, her hands flying to her still flat stomach in an instinctive protective gesture. She had picked up the phone with shaking fingers. "What did you just say to me?" "My mother told me everything, Dawn. She showed me the photos, the documents. I know about your research into my family's finances. I know you've been planning this whole relationship as some kind of investment in your future." "Photos? Documents? Jim, what are you talking about? What pregnancy?" The last word had come out as barely a whisper. She hadn't told him yet. How could he possibly know? "Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. The pregnancy test results, Dawn, the appointment confirmations. My mother had them all. She hired an investigator because she was suspicious of your motives, and he found everything." Dawn's world had tilted on its axis. Someone had been investigating her. Someone had discovered her pregnancy and told Jim before she could. And somehow, impossibly, they had twisted it into evidence of manipulation and gold digging. "Jim, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. I've seen the evidence. The staged meetings, the way you maneuvered yourself into my life, the research you did on my family's money before we ever met. Did you think I was stupid? Did you think I wouldn't figure it out?" "None of that is true," Dawn had cried, tears streaming down her face. "Jim, I love you. I've never cared about—" "Your family's money. I barely even know anything about it. The evidence says otherwise. Photos of you meeting with a private investigator, Dawn. Bank records showing payments you received. Documentation of your research into the Bremer family fortune. How can you stand there and lie to my face?" Dawn had felt the world spinning around her, nothing making sense. A private investigator? Bank records? She had never done any of those things, had never even thought to research Jim's family background. She knew they were wealthy, but she had fallen in love with Jim, the medical student, not Jim, the heir to a fortune. "I don't know what you're talking about," she had whispered. "I've never met with any investigator. I don't know anything about bank records or research. Jim, someone is lying to you." "My mother doesn't lie to me, Dawn. And she has photographs, timestamps, financial records. Are you telling me that's not you meeting with someone in the coffee shop downtown 3 weeks ago? Are you telling me you didn't receive $5,000 in cash the day after that meeting?" Dawn had searched her memory frantically. 3 weeks ago, she had met with her student loan counselor at a coffee shop downtown to discuss payment options. And yes, she had received money. Her tax refund, which she had deposited the next day. But how could someone have photographed that meeting and twisted it into something sinister? "Jim, you're not listening to me. Yes, I met with someone at a coffee shop, but it was my student loan counselor, and the money was my tax refund. This is all some terrible misunderstanding." "Stop lying!" Jim had shouted, his voice breaking with pain and anger. "Just stop! I trusted you, Dawn. I loved you. I was planning to propose to you next month. I had the ring picked out and everything." Dawn's heart had shattered completely at those words. He had been planning to propose. They could have been engaged, married, raising their baby together. Instead, someone had poisoned him against her with lies and fabricated evidence. "Jim, please," she had sobbed. "I'm telling you the truth. I love you more than anything in this world. I would never ever try to trap you or manipulate you. The pregnancy, I just found out 2 weeks ago, and I was so happy because I thought you'd be happy too." "Happy?" Jim's voice had turned ice cold. "Happy to be trapped by someone who's been playing me from the beginning? Happy to have my life planned out by someone who saw me as nothing more than a meal ticket? That's not what happened. Jim, you know me. You know who I am. How can you believe I would do something like that? I thought I knew you, but people wear masks, don't they, Dawn? People pretend to be someone they're not to get what they want, and what you wanted was financial security." "What I wanted was you," Dawn had whispered, her voice breaking completely. "What I wanted was a life with you, a family with you, I don't care about money, Jim. I care about you. Then why didn't you tell me about the pregnancy as soon as you found out? Why were you waiting? Dawn had tried to explain about wanting to make it special, about the dinner reservation and the wrapped book, but Jim had cut her off. You were waiting to spring it on me at the perfect moment for maximum impact. You were waiting until you could be sure I was trapped. The cruelty in his voice had been like a knife twisting in her chest. This wasn't the Jim she knew, the gentle man who held her when she cried, who brought her soup when she was sick, who told her she was beautiful even when she woke up with messy hair and no makeup. This was a stranger, speaking to her with contempt and disgust. I can't do this, Jim had said finally. I can't be with someone who's been lying to me from the beginning. I can't trust you, Dawn, and I can't raise a child with someone I don't trust. Jim, please, it's over. Don't call me. Don't come to my apartment. Don't try to contact me. We're done. The line had gone dead, leaving Dawn alone with her broken heart and the tiny life growing inside her. Now, 6 years later, sitting in her kitchen while her daughters did homework, Dawn remembered every word of that conversation with perfect, painful clarity. She had tried calling Jim back that night, had tried for weeks to reach him, but he had blocked her number, moved apartments, and seemingly vanished from her life completely. She had been forced to finish her pregnancy alone, to give birth alone, to raise Lily and Rose alone, all while carrying the knowledge that somewhere out there their father believed she was a manipulative liar who had tried to trap him for money. Ms. Kindheart, are you still there? Jim's voice on the phone brought her back to the present. Yes, I'm here. Monday morning sounds fine. Good. I'll see you then. Another pause. Dawn could hear something in his voice, something that sounded almost like regret or longing, but she couldn't be sure. Dawn, he said softly, her name barely a whisper. Yes? Never mind. I'll see you Monday. The line went dead, and Dawn stared at her phone for a long moment before setting it aside. Lily looked up from her reading book. Mummy, why do you look sad again? Dawn managed a smile for her daughter. This beautiful little girl, who had Jim's eyes and his stubborn chin, but her own gentle heart. I'm not sad, sweetheart. Mommy just got a new job. Will you be happy at your new job? Rose asked, looking up from her coloring. Dawn looked at her daughters, these precious children who had never known their father, who asked questions about him that she couldn't answer honestly. Soon she would be working in the same building as the man who had given them life but had never acknowledged their existence. I don't know, baby girl, she said honestly, but sometimes we have to do things even when they're hard. What she didn't say was that seeing Jim again had reopened. Every wound she thought had healed. What she didn't say was that despite everything, despite the pain and the years of struggle and the cruel words he had spoken, her heart had stuttered with recognition and longing when she saw him again. What she didn't say was that she was terrified of what would happen when he learned the truth about Lily and Rose, and even more terrified of what would happen if he never learned it at all. Chapter 3. Workplace Tension. Dawn's first Monday at Bremer Medical Center arrived with the kind of crisp autumn morning that made everything feel like a fresh start. She had spent the weekend preparing, researching hospital protocols, laying out her most professional outfits, and trying to explain to Lily and Rose why Mommy seemed both excited and nervous about her new job. Will you make friends at work, Mommy? Lily had asked over breakfast, syrup from her pancakes making her words slightly sticky. I hope so, sweetheart, Dawn had replied, though the truth was far more complicated. She would be working in the same building as Jim, possibly seeing him daily, and she had no idea how to navigate that emotional minefield while maintaining her professional composure. The HR orientation took place in a cheerful conference room on the second floor, far from the executive offices where Jim worked. Dawn told herself she was relieved by this distance, though part of her kept listening for his voice in the hallways, kept glancing toward the elevators, hoping and dreading she might glimpse him. Her supervisor, Maria Santos, was a warm woman, in her 50s, who had been with the hospital for nearly 20 years. "You'll love it here," Maria said, as she walked Dawn through the patient care coordinator responsibilities. "Dr. Bremer, our CEO, really believes in putting patients first. Sometimes that means extra work for us, but it's meaningful work." Dawn nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest at the mention of Jim's name. She had spent 6 years trying to forget him, and now she would hear about him daily, would be working to support his vision for patient care. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her office was small but bright, with a window overlooking the hospital's healing garden. Dawn spent her first morning familiarizing herself with computer systems and patient databases, losing herself in technical details as a way to avoid thinking about the emotional complexity of her situation. It was just after lunch when Jim appeared. In her doorway, Dawn looked up from her computer screen to find him standing there, and for a moment neither spoke. He had loosened his tie since morning, and his sleeves were rolled up, a casual gesture that reminded her painfully of their college days when he would study like that, bent over medical textbooks while she graded papers nearby. "How's your first day going?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Very well, thank you," Dawn replied, matching his professional tone. "Maria has been extremely helpful, and the systems are more intuitive than I expected." Jim nodded, stepping slightly into her office but not approaching her desk. "I wanted to personally welcome you to the team. Patient care coordination is crucial to what we do here, and I'm confident you'll excel in the role." The formality between them felt like a wall built from years and hurt feelings. Dawn found herself studying his face, looking for traces of the young man she had once known so intimately. There were lines around his eyes now, a slight crease between his brows that suggested he carried more weight than just professional responsibility. She wondered if he had been happy in the years since they parted, if he had found love with someone else, if he ever thought about what might have been. "I appreciate the opportunity," Dawn said, forcing herself to look away from his face and back to her computer screen. "I'm looking forward to contributing to the hospital's mission." Jim lingered in the doorway, and Dawn could feel his gaze on her, even as she pretended to focus on her work. Finally, he cleared his throat. "If you need anything, any resources, support, guidance, don't hesitate to reach out. My assistant can schedule a meeting if needed." "Thank you," Dawn said, without looking up. "I'll keep that in mind." She heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway, and only then did she allow herself to breathe fully again. This was going to be even harder than she had anticipated. The rest of the week fell into a pattern that was both routine and torturous. Dawn threw herself into her work with fierce dedication, staying late to catch up on case files and building relationships with the medical staff. She was exceptional at her job, and word quickly spread through the hospital about the new patient coordinator who actually listened to families and fought for their needs. But every day brought small encounters with Jim that left her emotionally drained. He would pass her in the hallway, offering a polite nod that somehow felt more distant than if he had ignored her completely. He would appear in meetings where patient care policies were discussed, his voice professional and authoritative as he spoke about hospital initiatives that Dawn found herself genuinely impressed by. The most difficult moments were when she glimpsed the man she had once loved, when she saw him comforting a distraught family in the ICU waiting room, kneeling beside a crying child to explain a procedure in terms she could understand. Dawn's chest would tighten with recognition. This was the Jim she remembered, compassionate, dedicated, willing to give of himself to help others. It was during her second week that Dawn overheard the conversation that changed everything. She was working late, reviewing files for the next day's cases, when voices drifted from the nearby break room. She recognized Jim's voice immediately, but it took her a moment to identify the second speaker as Dr. Catherine Walsh, the hospital's chief of pediatrics. "Noticed you've been distracted lately," Dr. Walsh was saying. "Is everything all right?" There was a long pause before Jim replied. "Do you ever wonder about the roads not taken, Kate? The choices you made that seemed right at the time but left you wondering, what if?" "Every day," came the gentle reply. "But that's part of being human, isn't it? We make the best decisions we can with the information we have. What if the information was wrong? What if someone you trusted completely lied to you? And you made the biggest mistake of your life based on those lies?" Dawn's breath caught. She shouldn't be listening to this private conversation, but she found herself frozen in place, her pulse quickening as she recognized the pain in Jim's voice. "Jim, what are you talking about?" Another long pause. "There was a woman years ago. I thought she was trying to manipulate me, to use me for financial gain. I had what I believed was proof. Photographs, documents, financial records. So I ended things cruelly. I said things to her that I can never take back. And now? Now I'm not sure any of it was real. I've been thinking about it more and more lately, especially since, well, it doesn't matter. The point is, I destroyed something. Beautiful based on lies, and I don't know how to live with that." Dawn's hands were shaking as she quietly gathered her things and slipped out of the office, her mind reeling from what she had just heard. Jim suspected he had been lied to. After all these years, was he finally questioning what his mother had told him? The revelation followed her home, haunting her as she helped Lily and Rose with their homework, as she tucked them into bed, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Part of her wanted to confront him, to demand answers about why he was having these doubts now. But a larger part of her was terrified of reopening wounds that had taken so long to heal. The next morning brought a new complication. Dawn was reviewing patient files when she noticed one that made her blood run cold. The name at the top of the chart was Elena Bremer, Jim's mother. According to the file, Elena had been admitted 3 days earlier for cardiac monitoring following chest pains. She was stable, but would require ongoing observation. As the patient care coordinator, Dawn would be responsible for liaising with the family, ensuring proper communication between medical staff and loved ones. Dawn stared at the file for a long time, remembering the woman who had destroyed her relationship with Jim. Elena Bremer had been sophisticated and intimidating when Dawn had met her briefly at a few social functions, but she had seemed polite enough. Dawn had never suspected that behind that polished exterior lay someone capable of such elaborate deception. Now Eleanor was her patient's mother, and Dawn would have to interact with her professionally. The thought made her stomach churn, but she forced herself to approach the situation with the same dedication she brought to every case. She was preparing to visit Eleanor's room when Jim appeared at her office door again. "Dawn, I need to speak with you about one of your cases," he said, his expression more serious than usual. "Of course. Which case?" "My mother, Eleanor Bremer. She's been admitted for cardiac observation." Dawn's grip tightened on the file folder. "Yes, I saw that. I was just preparing to check on her status." Jim stepped into her office and closed the door behind him, a gesture that immediately heightened the tension in the small space. "I wanted to give you a heads up before you meet with her. My mother can be challenging. She has strong opinions about how things should be done, and she's not always respectful to hospital staff." Dawn almost laughed at the understatement. If Jim only knew what his mother was capable of, how she had manipulated and lied to destroy their relationship. But she kept her expression neutral. "I appreciate the warning. I'll handle her case with appropriate professionalism." "That's not what I'm worried about," Jim said, moving closer to her desk. "I'm worried about how she might treat you. My mother has very specific ideas about people's backgrounds and social status. If she says anything inappropriate, I want you to know that it doesn't reflect the hospital's values or my own views." Dawn looked up at him, surprised by the concern in his voice. "I can handle difficult family members, Jim. It's part of the job." "I know you can handle it, but I also know how cutting my mother can be when she wants to make a point, and I don't want—" He trailed off, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that was achingly familiar. "You don't want what?" Dawn asked softly. Jim looked at her for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "I don't want her to hurt you," he said finally. "You don't deserve that. You never deserved that." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond professional concern. Dawn felt tears threaten at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you for the warning," she managed to say. "I'll be careful." Jim nodded and moved toward the door, but he paused with his hand on the handle. "Dawn, if there's ever anything you need to tell me, anything at all, I hope you know you can trust me." Before Dawn could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with Elena Bremer's patient file and the growing certainty that their carefully constructed professional distance was beginning to crumble. That afternoon, Dawn made her way to Elena's private room, steeling herself for what was sure to be a difficult encounter. She knocked softly and entered to find an elegant woman in her 70s sitting up in bed, her silver hair perfectly styled despite her hospital stay. Elena looked up as Dawn entered, and recognition flickered across her features. For just a moment, Dawn saw something that might have been guilt or regret, but it was quickly replaced by cool composure. "Ms. Kindheart," Elena said, her voice perfectly polite. "What an unexpected surprise to see you here." "Mrs. Bremer," Dawn replied, maintaining her professional demeanor. "I'm the patient care coordinator assigned to your case. I wanted to check on how you're feeling and see if you have any questions about your treatment plan." Eleanor studied Dawn for a long moment, her keen eyes taking in every detail. "So you work for my son now? How interesting." Dawn refused to be intimidated. "I work for Bremer Medical Center, yes. My job is to ensure that you receive the best possible care and that your family stays informed about your treatment." "And does my son know about your history together?" The question was asked with deceptive casualness, but Dawn could hear the underlying threat. Elena was testing her, trying to see if she would crumble under pressure. "My relationship with Dr. Bremer is entirely professional," Dawn said firmly. "My focus is on your health and well-being during your stay here." Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course it is. How refreshing to see that some people can learn from their mistakes." Dawn felt a surge of anger at the woman's casual cruelty, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Is there anything specific you need regarding your care, Mrs. Bremer?" "Actually, there is." Elena's voice turned sharp. "I'd like to request a different coordinator, someone with more suitable qualifications." Dawn had expected this. "I understand your concerns, but I'm the most experienced coordinator available for your case. I assure you that you'll receive excellent care under my supervision." "I'm sure you believe that," Elena said dismissively. "But I think it would be better for everyone involved if we made a change. I wouldn't want any complications to arise." The threat was clear, though veiled in politeness. Elena was trying to get Dawn removed from her case, probably hoping to avoid any awkward questions about the past. "I'll discuss your concerns with Dr. Bremer," Dawn said, refusing to back down. "But unless there are specific deficiencies in my care, I'll continue to serve as your coordinator." Elena's eyes flashed with something that might have been admiration or annoyance. "You've developed quite a spine, haven't you?" "That's new." Dawn didn't reply, simply made a note in Elena's chart and prepared to leave. But Elena's voice stopped her at the door. "Ms. Kindheart, I hope you understand that some mistakes can't be undone. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt." Dawn turned back to face the woman who had destroyed her happiness 6 years ago. "You're right, Mrs. Bremer. Some mistakes can't be undone, but the truth has a way of coming out eventually, doesn't it?" She left the room before Elena could respond, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and defiance. The battle lines had been drawn, and Dawn knew that her job and her secret were now more precarious than ever. Chapter 4. The twins' emergency. The call came at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon that had started like any other. Dawn was reviewing discharge plans for a pediatric patient when her phone rang with the number she recognized as Lily and Rose's elementary school. "Ms. Kindheart, this is Principal Martinez. There's been an accident. The girls are okay, but they've been taken to the emergency room. A car ran the red light outside the school during dismissal and—" Dawn didn't hear the rest. The phone slipped from her hands as the world tilted sideways, her worst nightmare becoming reality in the space of a heartbeat. Her babies, her precious girls. She was running before conscious thought caught up with her, abandoning her desk and racing through the hospital corridors toward the emergency department. Her chest felt tight, each breath a struggle as pure terror coursed through her veins. "My daughters," she gasped to the triage nurse, "Lily and Rose Kindheart. They were brought in from an accident." "Bay 3, the nurse said gently, recognizing the wild panic in Dawn's eyes. "Dr. Patterson is with them now." Dawn rushed toward the indicated bay, her hands shaking as she pushed aside the curtain. The sight that greeted her nearly brought her to her knees. Both girls were conscious but frightened, Rose crying quietly while Lily tried to comfort her. "Sister, despite the obvious pain she was in herself, Mommy!" Rose cried when she saw Dawn reaching out with her uninjured arm. Dawn was beside them instantly, gathering them both as carefully as she could, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here, babies. Mommy's here. You're going to be okay." Dr. Patterson looked up from Rose's chart, his expression gentle but serious. "Ms. Kindheart, I'm Dr. Patterson. The girls are stable, but we need to discuss their injuries." Dawn nodded, not trusting her voice as she stroked Lily's hair with one hand and held Rose's fingers with the other. "Lily has a fractured wrist and some bruising on her ribs. We'll need x-rays to determine if there are any internal injuries. Rose has a dislocated shoulder and possible concussion. She was unconscious briefly at the scene." The words hit Dawn like physical blows. Her daughters, her whole world broken and hurt because she hadn't been there to protect them. "The driver," she managed to ask, "ran the light and fled the scene. The police are handling that investigation. Right now, our focus is on the girls." Dawn nodded, trying to process the medical information while her heart screamed with terror and guilt. She should have picked them up herself instead of letting them walk home with friends. She should have been there. "We need to take them for imaging," Dr. Patterson continued. "The orthopedic surgeon is on his way for Lily's wrist, and we want neurology to evaluate Rose's head injury." "Whatever they need," Dawn said immediately. "Please, just help them." It was then that she heard familiar footsteps behind her, and Jim's voice saying quietly, "Dr. Patterson, what's the status?" Dawn turned to find Jim standing at the entrance to the bay, his face pale with concern. For a moment, she was confused about why he was there, until she remembered where they were. This was his hospital. Of course, he would be notified about a multiple casualty pediatric case, but the look on his face wasn't just professional concern. There was something deeper there, something that looked almost like personal anguish. "Dr. Bremer," Dr. Patterson said with obvious relief, "I was about to call for a consult. We have a 5-year-old with possible internal injuries and another with head trauma. Both will need surgical evaluation." Jim's eyes moved to the girls on the gurneys, and Dawn watched his face change completely. The professional mask slipped away, replaced by something she couldn't identify. He stared at Lily and Rose as if he'd seen ghosts, his complexion going ashen. These are... Jim's voice cracked slightly. These are Dawn's daughters. Yes, Dr. Patterson confirmed. Ms. Kindheart works here as a patient coordinator. The girls were in an accident outside their school. Jim stepped closer to the gurneys, his medical training warring with something else entirely. Dawn watched as his gaze moved from one girl to the other, taking in their features with an intensity that made her stomach clench with fear. Lily looked up at Jim with tear-filled eyes. "Are you a doctor too?" she asked, her voice small and scared. Jim said softly, kneeling beside her gurney so they were at eye level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily, that's my sister Rose. She got hurt worse than me because she pushed me out of the way when the car came." Jim's breath caught audibly. "That was very brave of your sister. And you're being very brave too." He turned to Rose, who was watching him with curious eyes despite her obvious pain. "Hi, Rose. I'm Dr. Jim. How are you feeling?" "My head hurts," Rose whispered. "And my shoulder. But I wanted to save Lily. She's my twin." "Twins," Jim repeated, and Dawn heard something break in his voice. "How old are you girls?" 5, Lily answered. "We'll be 6 in February. February 14th. That's Valentine's Day." Dawn watched Jim's face go completely white. February 14th. Exactly 9 months after the night she had planned to tell him about the pregnancy, before his mother's lies had torn them apart. Jim's hands were shaking as he stood up, his eyes meeting Dawn's across the small space. The questions in his gaze were overwhelming, desperate, hopeful, terrified questions that she couldn't answer here, not now, not with their daughters lying injured between them. "Dr. Bremer?" Dr. Patterson's voice seemed to come from far away. "Should we proceed with the imaging?" Jim forced himself back to the present, his medical training overriding his personal shock. "Yes. And I want Dr. Hendricks to handle the orthopedic consult personally. If Rose needs neurosurgery, call Dr. Kim immediately." "The best surgeons," Dawn said, understanding flooding through her terror. "You're calling in the best surgeons." Jim looked at her directly for the first time since entering the bay. "They deserve the best care possible," he said quietly. "Nothing less." The next few hours passed in a blur of tests, consultations, and waiting. Jim stayed, despite having no medical reason to be there. He coordinated care, spoke with specialists, and somehow managed to expedite every procedure. Dawn found herself grateful for his presence, even as she dreaded the conversation she knew was coming. Rose's concussion was mild, requiring observation, but no surgery. Lily's wrist needed surgical repair, but the internal injuries were minor bruising that would heal with time. Both girls would recover completely. Though they would need weeks of careful monitoring, it was nearly midnight when both girls finally fell asleep in their shared hospital room, medicated and comfortable, but still closely watched. Dawn sat between their beds, holding their hands, unable to let go even in sleep. Jim had been absent for the last hour, making phone calls and handling administrative details. When he returned, he brought coffee for Dawn and settled into the chair across from the girls' beds. For a long time, they sat in silence, listening to the quiet sounds of the sleeping children and the distant hum of hospital machinery. Finally, Jim spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They have my eyes." Dawn's heart clenched. "Jim, Lily has my cleft chin. Rose has that birthmark on her wrist, the same one I have." His voice was getting stronger, more certain. "They're mine, aren't they?" Dawn looked at her sleeping daughters, these beautiful children who had never known their father, and felt the weight of 6 years of secrets pressing down on her chest. "Yes," she whispered. Jim's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried to," Dawn said, tears spilling over. "That night you called me. I was going to tell you about the pregnancy that weekend. I had dinner reservations. I had bought a book to give you as a surprise. But then you called and accused me of getting pregnant to trap you, and you said such horrible things. Because my mother told me you were manipulating me, Jim interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. She had photographs, documents, proof that you were after our money. None of it was real, Jim. I never met with any investigator. I never researched your family's finances. I loved you. I only ever loved you. Jim buried his face in his hands. What have I done? My God, what have I done? You believed someone you trusted, Dawn said quietly. I can't blame you for that. I can blame myself, Jim said fiercely. I should have trusted you. I should have given you the chance to explain. Instead, I said cruel things and then disappeared from your life. You thought you were protecting yourself? I was protecting myself from the wrong person. Jim looked up at her, his eyes red with unshed tears. I've missed everything, their first steps, their first words, birthdays, bedtime stories, everything. They're good girls, Dawn said softly. They're smart and kind and funny. Lily loves to read, just like you did. Rose is artistic. She draws pictures for me every day. They ask about their father sometimes, and I never knew what to tell them. They know? About me? Dawn shook her head. How could I tell them? I thought you hated me. I thought you wanted nothing to do with us. Jim stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. I want to be part of their lives, he said without turning around. I want to be their father. Jim, I know I have no right to ask. I know I hurt you terribly, and I know you have every reason not to trust me, but these are my daughters, Dawn. I've already lost 5 years with them. I can't lose any more. Dawn looked at Lily and Rose, sleeping peacefully despite their injuries, and felt her heart breaking all over again. For 5 years she had raised them alone, had been both mother and father, had answered their questions about why they didn't have a daddy like other kids. The thought of sharing them, of opening their carefully protected world to include the man who had shattered her own world, was terrifying. But looking at Jim's reflection in the window, seeing the anguish and regret written across his features, she also saw the father her daughters had never had. And despite everything, despite the pain and the years of separation, she saw the man she had never stopped loving. They're going to ask questions, she said finally. Jim turned back to face her. What will you tell them? The truth. That their daddy made a mistake, but that he wants to make it right. And us? Jim asked quietly. What about us? Dawn looked at him across the hospital room where their daughters lay sleeping, injured but alive, and felt the weight of all their unspoken. History, I don't know, she whispered. I honestly don't know. Jim nodded, accepting her uncertainty, even as his eyes held a hope that made her chest ache. Can I stay? He asked. Tonight, I mean, in case they need anything. Dawn wanted to say no, wanted to protect herself from the dangerous hope that was beginning to bloom in her chest. But she looked at her daughters, and she thought about how Jim had moved heaven and earth to ensure they received the best care possible. And she nodded. They'll want to know who you are when they wake up. Then we'll tell them, Jim said simply. We'll tell them I'm their father, and that I love them, and that I'm never going to leave them again. As Dawn settled back into her chair, watching the rise and fall of her daughter's breathing while Jim took up vigil on the other side of their beds, she realized that their carefully separate worlds had just collided in a way that would change everything. For better or worse, Jim Bremer was back in their lives, and this time he wasn't going anywhere. Chapter 5. Confronting the Past. Dawn woke to the sound of soft giggling and found herself looking at a scene that took her breath away. Jim was sitting cross-legged, on the floor beside Rose's hospital bed, carefully helping her color in a coloring book with her good hand, while Lily watched from her own bed, her casted wrist propped on a pillow. "Daddy Jim, you're coloring outside the lines," Rose said with 5-year-old authority, her head tilted in concentration. "Daddy Jim!" Dawn sat up straighter, her heart clenching at the easy way the title fell from her daughter's lips. Jim looked up, his eyes meeting Dawn's with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. "They woke up about an hour ago. We've been getting acquainted. He brought us coloring books and crayons," Lily announced proudly. "And he said he's our real daddy, not just a pretend daddy." "I hope that was okay," Jim said quietly to Dawn. "They were asking questions, and I thought, it's fine," Dawn managed, though her emotions were anything but fine. Seeing Jim with their daughters, seeing how naturally they had accepted him, was both beautiful and terrifying. "Mommy, why didn't you tell us Daddy Jim worked at the same place as you?" Rose asked innocently. Dawn and Jim exchanged glances. "It's complicated, sweetheart," Dawn said carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups have to work things out." "Are you worked out now?" Lily wanted to know. "We're working on it," Jim answered when Dawn seemed unable to find words. Dr. Patterson appeared in the doorway, smiling at the domestic scene. "Good morning, everyone. How are our patients feeling today?" "Better," both girls chorused, though Rose winced slightly when she tried to raise her injured shoulder. The doctor examined both girls thoroughly, pronouncing their recovery on track. "Rose, you can go home today if you promise to take it easy. Lily, we'll need to keep you one more night for observation, but you're doing beautifully." After Dr. Patterson left, an awkward silence settled over the room. The girls were occupied with their coloring books, but Dawn could feel Jim's gaze on her, heavy with unspoken questions and regrets. "I need to make some calls," Dawn said finally, standing up. "Work, the school, insurance." "I've already handled the school and insurance," Jim said quietly. "And I spoke to Maria about your schedule. Take all the time you need." Dawn stared at him, surprised by his efficiency. "You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "These are my daughters too. Taking care of them is my responsibility." The possessive way he said "my daughters" sent a complicated mix of emotions through Dawn. Relief that she no longer had to bear all the responsibility alone, but also fear about what this new dynamic would mean for their family. "I need some air," she said, suddenly feeling suffocated by the small room and the weight of Jim's presence. "Mommy, where are you going?" Rose asked, looking up from her coloring. "Just to get some coffee, baby. I'll be right back." Dawn stepped out into the hospital corridor, her legs unsteady as the full impact of the last 24 hours hit her. Jim knew about the twins. He had accepted them immediately, without question, and was already stepping into the role of their father. After 5 years of single motherhood, Dawn didn't know how to navigate this new reality. She found herself in the hospital's chapel, a quiet space she had never visited during her months of working there. The room was empty, except for simple wooden pews and a stained glass window that cast colorful patterns on the floor. Dawn sank into a back pew, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she tried to process everything that had happened. Her daughters were safe. That was the most important thing. But their accident had also shattered the careful boundaries she had built around her life, exposing the truth she had carried alone for so long. "I thought I might find you here." Dawn turned to see Jim standing in the chapel doorway, his expression uncertain. The girls asleep again. The nurse is keeping an eye on them. He moved down the aisle slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "May I?" Dawn nodded toward the pew beside her, and Jim sat down, leaving a careful distance between them. For several minutes they sat in silence, the weight of 6 years of separation heavy in the quiet space. "I hired a private investigator," Jim said finally. Dawn's head snapped toward him. "What?" Yesterday, after I left the girls' room, I hired someone to look into what really happened 6 years ago. I need to know the truth, Dawn. All of it. Jim, no. Let me finish. His voice was steady but filled with pain. I've spent 6 years thinking you betrayed me, thinking you tried to manipulate me. But seeing those girls, seeing how much they look like me, seeing the way you've raised them, I know you're not capable of the things my mother accused you of. I was a coward, and I was wrong, and I need to understand how wrong. Dawn felt tears welling up in her eyes. The investigator won't find anything because there was nothing to find. I never met with anyone. I never took money. I never researched your family. The only thing I ever wanted was you. I know that now, Jim said quietly. I think I knew it then too, but I was too young and too scared to trust my instincts over my mother's evidence. She really did have photographs. Jim nodded grimly. Photos of you meeting with a man in a coffee shop. Bank records showing a deposit to your account. Documents that looked like background research on my family's finances. It all looked so convincing. The coffee shop was my student loan meeting. The deposit was my tax refund. Someone very carefully constructed a lie that looked like truth. My mother, Jim said, the words tasting bitter. She destroyed us, Dawn. She destroyed our family before it even had a chance to begin. Dawn wiped tears from her cheeks. Why? What did I ever do to her? You weren't what she wanted for me. You came from a different background, a different social class. She thought you were beneath me. Jim's voice hardened. She was willing to do anything to break us up, including fabricating evidence and destroying your reputation. And now, Jim turned to face her fully. Now she's going to face the consequences of what she did. The investigator will uncover the truth, and when he does, I'm going to make sure she understands exactly what her lies cost all of us. Dawn felt a flicker of fear. Jim, she's your mother, and she's sick. She's sick because guilt has been eating at her for 6 years. Jim said harshly, do you know what she said to me yesterday when I told her I was staying at the hospital all night? She asked if I was getting involved with that woman again. She still thinks you're beneath me, Dawn. She still believes her lies were justified. So, what happens now? Dawn asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jim was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I want to be part of their lives. I want to be their father in every way that matters. But I know I have no right to ask that of you. I know I hurt you too badly to expect forgiveness. You were lied to, Dawn said softly. You were manipulated by someone you trusted. I can't forgive what you said to me that night. Those words will always hurt. But I can understand why you said them. Can you? Jim turned to look at her, hope flickering in his eyes. Can you really understand? Because I've replayed that conversation 1,000 times, and I hate myself more each time I remember how cruel I was. Dawn studied his face, seeing the genuine anguish there. You were protecting yourself from what you thought was betrayal. It was wrong, but it was human. And now? Can you trust me now? The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and fear. Dawn thought about her daughters, about how they had instinctively trusted Jim, about how he had moved heaven and earth to ensure they received the best care possible. I want to, she admitted, for their sake and maybe for mine too. But it's going to take time, Jim. 6 years of believing I wasn't worth fighting for doesn't just disappear overnight. I have time, Jim said immediately. I have all the time in the world. I'll prove to you that I've changed, that I'll never hurt you or the girls again. I'll prove that I'm worth the risk. And your mother? Jim's jaw tightened. My mother will have to learn to accept that Lily and Rose are my daughters and that you are their mother. If she can't do that, then she'll have to accept that she won't be part of our lives. The finality in his voice surprised Dawn. "Jim, you can't just cut off your family." "Yes, I can." His voice was steel. "She destroyed my family once. I won't. Let her do it again." They sat in silence for several more minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Dawn stood up. "I should get back to the girls." Jim rose as well. "Dawn, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why did you name them Lily and Rose?" A small smile tugged at Dawn's lips despite everything. "You used to bring me flowers, always lilies and roses. You said they reminded you of beauty and strength." Jim's breath caught. "You remembered." "I remembered everything," Dawn said softly. "Even when I tried to forget, even when I was angry and hurt, I remembered the good parts. I wanted the girls to have something beautiful from their father, even if they never knew him." Jim's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. "They're so beautiful, Dawn, so perfect. You did an amazing job raising them alone. I didn't have a choice." "You did have a choice. You could have. There were other options. But you chose to have them, to raise them, to give them love and stability, even when it was hard. You're an incredible mother." Dawn felt her throat close with emotion. "They're the best parts of us, Jim. Even when I was angry with you, I could see you in them, and it made me love them even more." "I want to know everything about them," Jim said urgently. "Their favorite foods, their favorite books, what makes them laugh, what scares them, all of it. I want to know my daughters." "You will," Dawn promised. "If you're really serious about being their father, you'll have plenty of time to learn." "I'm serious," Jim said firmly. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." As they walked back toward the girls' room together, Dawn felt the first stirrings of something she had thought was dead forever. Hope. Not just hope for her daughters to have their father in their lives, but hope that maybe, somehow, the love she and Jim had shared wasn't completely lost. Maybe, with time and patience and a lot of hard work, they could build something new from the ruins of what they had lost. Maybe they could finally become the family they were always meant to be. But as they reached the girls' room and Dawn saw Elena Bremer standing beside Lily's bed, her face pale with shock as she stared at the two children who were clearly her son's daughters, Dawn realized that the hardest battles were still to come. Elena looked up as they entered, her eyes moving from Jim to Dawn to the sleeping girls, and back again. "So," she said quietly, her voice carefully controlled, "it seems we have a great deal to discuss." Chapter 6. Building Trust. The tension in the hospital room was so thick it was almost suffocating. Eleanor Bremer stood frozen beside Lily's bed, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the bed rail as she stared at the sleeping child whose features so clearly mirrored her son's. "Mother," Jim said, his voice carefully controlled, "what are you doing here? You should be resting in your own room." Elena's gaze moved slowly from Lily to Rose, taking in every detail of their faces, their coloring, their bone structure. When she finally looked up at Jim, there was something in her eyes that Dawn couldn't quite identify, guilt perhaps, or fear. "I heard there had been an accident involving children," Elena said quietly. "I came to see if there was anything I could do to help. I had no idea." She trailed off, her eyes returning to the girls. "No idea what?" Jim's voice had turned dangerous. "No idea that I had children? No idea that the woman you destroyed 6 years ago was carrying my daughters when you fabricated evidence to break us apart?" Elena flinched as if she had been slapped. "Jim, please, not here, not in front of my daughters." Jim stepped closer to his mother, his body language protective and threatening. "The granddaughters you've never met because of your lies." Dawn watched the confrontation with growing unease. The girls were still sleeping, but they were light sleepers, and the last thing they needed was to wake up to raised voices and family drama. "Jim," she said quietly, "maybe we should take this somewhere else." "No," Elena said suddenly, her voice stronger. "No, I think it's time we settled this here and now." She looked directly at Dawn for the first time since entering the room. "Miss Kindheart, I owe you an apology." Dawn stared at her in shock. "You what?" Elena's composure wavered slightly. "An apology for what I did 6 years ago. For the lies I told, the evidence I fabricated, the lives I destroyed." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "For the granddaughters I've never known because of my own prejudice and fear." Jim looked as stunned as Dawn felt. "Mother—" "Let me finish," Elena said firmly, her eyes still on Dawn. "I hired actors to pose as investigators. I staged photographs to make it appear you were meeting with people, researching our family finances. I forged documents and bank records to make it seem like you were being paid for information. I did all of this because I was terrified that my son was going to marry beneath his station and ruin his future." The admission hung in the air like a bomb that had finally exploded. Dawn felt her knees go weak, and she sank into the chair beside Rose's bed. "You destroyed our lives," Dawn whispered. "You kept Jim from knowing his daughters for 5 years because you thought I wasn't good enough for him." "I know," Elena said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I know what I did was unforgivable. I've known it for years, but I was too proud and too afraid to admit it. I told myself I was protecting Jim, that I was saving him from making a mistake that would ruin his life. Instead, you ruined his chance at happiness," Dawn said, her voice growing stronger with anger. "You made him believe the woman he loved was a manipulative liar. You made me believe he thought I was worthless. You stole 6 years from us, Elena. 6 years Jim can never get back with his daughters." "I know," Elena repeated, her voice breaking. "I've been living with the guilt ever since. When I had my heart episode 3 days ago, all I could think about was dying without making this right. When I saw those children just now, saw how much they looked like Jim looked at that age." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Jim looked at his mother with a mixture of anger and pity. "Why now? Why are you admitting this now?" Eleanor wiped her eyes with a tissue from the bedside table. "Because I heard about the accident. Because I realized that somewhere out there my son might have children who were hurt and I didn't even know they existed. Because the guilt has been killing me slowly for 6 years and I can't carry it anymore." Dawn stood up slowly, her hands shaking with emotion. "Do you have any idea what it was like? Raising twins alone? Working 3 jobs just to pay rent, having no one to help when they were sick or scared? Do you know how many times they asked me why they didn't have a daddy like other kids?" "Dawn," Jim said softly, stepping toward her. "No," Dawn said, holding up a hand to stop him. "She needs to hear this. She needs to understand what her lies cost us." She turned back to Eleanor. "I loved your son more than I've ever loved anyone. I would have done anything for him, supported him through anything. And when he accused me of the things you made him believe, it broke something inside me that I'm not sure can ever be fixed." Eleanor nodded, accepting the verbal lashing without defense. "You're right. I destroyed something beautiful because I was too narrow-minded to see what it really was. I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back those 6 years or take away the pain I caused. But I can tell you that I was wrong about you, Dawn. Completely, utterly wrong." "What do you mean?" Elena looked at the sleeping girls, her expression soft despite her tears. "Look at them. Look at how healthy and happy they are, despite being raised by a single mother with limited resources. Look at how polite and well-behaved they were when they woke up. They thanked every nurse, said please and thank you for everything. You raised them with love and values and strength. You are exactly the kind of mother I should have wanted for my son's children." Dawn felt tears threatening again. "It's too late for compliments, Elena. I know it is, but I hope it's not too late for truth." Elena turned to Jim. "Your father and we raised you with certain expectations about social status and appropriate marriages. We thought success meant marrying within our social circle, accumulating wealth and prestige. But I see now that we raised you to value the wrong things. You raised me to be a snob, Jim said bluntly. Yes, Elena admitted. We did. And when you fell in love with someone who measured success by how much good she did in the world, rather than how much money she inherited, I was terrified. I thought she would drag you down. I never considered that maybe she would lift you up. Dawn sank back into her chair, emotionally exhausted by the confrontation. I still don't understand why you went to such elaborate lengths. If you didn't, approve of me, why not just talk to Jim about your concerns? Because I could see how much he loved you, Eleanor said simply. I could see that no rational argument would sway him. He looked at you the way— She paused, her voice catching. The way I used to look at his father before money and status became more important than love. I was jealous, I think. Jealous that you had captured my son's heart so completely when I felt like I was losing him to his medical career and his own life. Jim scrubbed his hands over his face. So you destroyed us to keep me close to you. I destroyed you to keep you in the life I thought you should have, and in doing so I lost you anyway. You've been distant from me for years, Jim. I knew you were unhappy. I knew something was missing from your life, but I convinced myself it was better than the alternative. The alternative being a family with the woman I loved and children who adored me? Elena nodded miserably. I was wrong about everything. At that moment, Rose stirred in her bed, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around the room in confusion, taking in the three adults standing awkwardly around the beds. "Mommy," she said sleepily, "why is everyone sad?" Dawn immediately moved to her daughter's side, smoothing her hair. "We're not sad, baby. We're just talking about grown-up things." Rose's gaze moved to Eleanor, whom she didn't recognize. "Who's the pretty lady?" Elena's breath caught at being called pretty by this beautiful granddaughter she had never known existed. I'm Jim's mother," she said softly. Rose considered this information seriously. "That makes you our grandmother?" Yes, I suppose. "It does," Elena said, her voice wondering. "Are you sad because we got hurt?" Rose asked with 5-year-old directness. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "It's okay," Rose said generously. "We're getting better. Daddy Jim is taking good care of us." "Daddy Jim?" Eleanor looked at her son with surprise. "They accepted me immediately," Jim said quietly. "No questions, no hesitation. They just welcomed me into their lives like I'd always been there. Because they needed you," Elena said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "They've been waiting for you their whole lives. Just like I've been waiting for them without knowing it." Lily began to wake up as well, alerted by the sound of voices. She looked around the room with the same confusion Rose had shown. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" she asked, immediately sensing the emotional tension. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Dawn assured her. "This is Elena, Jim's mother." Lily studied Elena with curious eyes. "Are you our grandma too?" Elena's composure finally cracked completely. "I would like to be," she whispered through her tears. "If you'll let me. If your mother will let me." Both girls looked at Dawn expectantly. Dawn found herself in an impossible position. She wanted to say no, wanted to protect her daughters from the woman who had caused so much pain. But she also saw genuine remorse in Elena's eyes, and she understood that her daughters deserved to know all of their family, complicated as it might be. "We'll see," Dawn said carefully. "Grandmothers have to earn the right to be in little girls' lives." Elena nodded eagerly. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." "Can we talk about this later?" Jim interrupted. "The girls need rest, and they don't need to be in the middle of adult conversations." Dawn nodded gratefully. "He's right. We all need time to process this." Elena stood to leave, but she paused at the door. "Dawn, I meant what I said, about being wrong about you. You're exactly the woman I should have wanted for my son. I just hope someday you can forgive a foolish old woman who let prejudice blind her to what really mattered." After Elena left, the room fell into silence. The girls settled back into sleep, emotionally exhausted by their injuries and the confusing adult drama they didn't fully understand. Jim sat down heavily in the chair Elena had vacated. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Dawn replied. "This is a lot for all of us to process." "She was right about one thing," Jim said quietly. "You are exactly the woman I should have chosen. You're exactly the woman I did choose before I let her lies poison my mind against you." Dawn looked at him across the space between their daughters' beds. "We can't go backward, Jim. Too much has happened. Too much time has passed." "I know we can't go backward," Jim said. "But maybe we can go forward. Maybe we can build something new, something stronger than what we had before. For the girls." "For the girls," Jim agreed. "And maybe, eventually, for us too." Dawn didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. As she watched Jim settle in for another night of keeping vigil over their daughters, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 years. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. But first, they had to learn how to be parents together. They had to figure out how to coexist in the same world without constantly reopening old wounds. They had to decide whether Elena's apology was genuine and whether she deserved a place in their complicated family structure. Most of all, they had to learn whether the love that had brought them together so many years ago was strong enough to survive the truth of what had torn them apart. As Dawn drifted off to sleep in her uncomfortable hospital chair, she allowed herself to hope that it might be. Chapter 7. Custody Battle. 3 weeks after the accident, Dawn thought they were finally settling into a routine. Jim had been true to his word about wanting to be part of the girls' lives. He picked them up from school twice a week, took them for weekend outings to the zoo or the Children's Museum, and had even set up a bedroom for them in his penthouse apartment for sleepovers. The girls adored him. They had adapted to having a father with the resilience that only children possess, and they seemed to bloom under his attention. Lily would chatter endlessly about everything she had learned at school, while Rose would show him her latest artwork. With shy pride, Jim, in turn, was completely smitten, approaching fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to his medical practice. Dawn watched these interactions with complicated emotions. Joy at seeing her daughters so happy, relief at no longer carrying the full burden of parenting alone, but also a wistful sadness for all the moments they had missed as a family. There were times when she caught Jim looking at her with something that felt like longing, and she would have to look away before her own carefully guarded heart betrayed her. Elena had been suspiciously quiet since her tearful confession at the hospital. She had visited the girls twice, bringing expensive gifts and speaking to them with the careful politeness of someone trying to earn forgiveness. Dawn remained wary, but the girls seemed to enjoy having a grandmother who told them stories about their father's childhood and promised to teach them proper table manners. It was on a Thursday evening, while Dawn was helping Rose with a particularly challenging art project, that the doorbell rang. Dawn opened the door to find a man in an expensive suit holding an official-looking envelope. "Miss Dawn Kindheart?" "Yes?" "You've been served." He handed her the envelope and walked away before she could ask any questions. Dawn stared at the envelope with growing dread. Legal documents were never good news, especially for single mothers with limited resources. She opened it with trembling fingers and felt the world tilt sideways as she read the contents. Elena Bremer was petitioning the court for custody of Lily and Rose Kindheart, claiming that Dawn was an unfit mother due to financial instability, inadequate housing, and her history of deceptive behavior regarding the paternity of the children. The petition requested that custody be awarded to James Bremer, with Elena serving as the children's primary caregiver given his demanding work schedule. Dawn sank onto her couch, the papers fluttering to the floor as her hands shook uncontrollably. This couldn't be happening. Elena had apologized, had seemed genuinely remorseful for what she had done. How could she now be trying to take away Dawn's children? "Mommy, what's wrong?" Lily appeared at her elbow, her small face creased with concern. "Nothing, sweetheart," Dawn managed, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. "Just some boring paperwork." But it wasn't boring paperwork. It was a declaration of war. Dawn called Jim immediately, her hands still shaking as she dialed his number. "Dawn, what's wrong?" His voice was alert, concerned. "Your mother is suing me for custody of the girls," Dawn said without preamble. Silence. "Then what?" "I just got served. She's claiming I'm an unfit mother and that you should have custody with her as their primary caregiver." "That's impossible. She wouldn't, after what she said at the hospital." Jim's voice trailed off. Apparently her apology was just another manipulation, Dawn said bitterly. "She wants my children, Jim. She wants to take them away from me. She can't do this. I won't let her do this. Can you stop her? She has money, lawyers, connections. I have an overdue electric bill and a car that needs new tires. Dawn, listen to me. She will not take those girls away from you. I will not let that happen. How can you promise that? This is your mother we're talking about. She has resources I can't even imagine. Then we'll fight her together. I'll hire the best family attorney in the state. I'll testify on your behalf. I'll do whatever it takes." Dawn felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Jim, she's using you. She's putting your name on the petition, but she wants to be their primary caregiver. She's trying to use you to get custody and then push you aside." There was another long silence. When Jim spoke again, his voice was cold with fury. "I'm going to call her right now. This ends tonight." "Jim, wait," but he had already hung up. 20 minutes later, Dawn's phone rang again. This time it was Jim, and his voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "I just spoke with my mother. She claims she's doing this for the girls' own good, that they deserve financial security and educational opportunities you can't provide." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that if she doesn't withdraw this petition immediately, she'll never see me or her granddaughters again. I told her that I'll fight her in court, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person she really is." Dawn felt a flutter of hope. "What did she say?" "She said I'm being emotional, and that I'll thank her when I realize how much better off the girls will be in her care." Jim's voice grew harder. "She actually believes she's doing the right thing, Dawn. She thinks she's saving them from poverty and giving them a better life at the cost of separating them from their mother. She doesn't think that matters. She thinks love is less important than money and status." Jim paused. "I'm coming over. We need to talk about how we're going to handle this." Jim arrived at Dawn's apartment 30 minutes later, still wearing his hospital scrubs and looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. The girls were in bed, and Dawn had spent the time since his call pacing her small living room and trying not to panic. "I've already called my attorney," Jim said without preamble. "Margaret Chen is the best family lawyer in the city. She'll represent you, and I'll cover all the costs." "Jim, I can't let you—" "Yes, you can. This is my mother causing this problem, and it's my responsibility to fix it. Besides, these are my daughters too. I have just as much at stake as you do." Dawn sank onto her couch, suddenly feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the past month. "I'm scared, Jim." What if she wins? What if the court decides that a wealthy grandmother can provide better for them than a single mother with a modest income? Jim sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. She won't win. Margaret is brilliant, and we have the truth on our side. Plus, I'll testify that I want the girls to remain with you. Will you? Even though giving them to Elena would be easier for you? You'd still get to see them, but you wouldn't have to deal with me. Jim turned to face her fully. Dawn, do you really think I would choose easy over right? Do you think I would let my daughters be raised by the woman who destroyed their parents' relationship with lies and manipulation? I don't know what to think anymore. 6 years ago, I thought I knew you completely, and then you believed the worst about me, without even giving me a chance to defend myself. You're right, Jim said quietly. 6 years ago, I was young and insecure, and too willing to believe that someone like you couldn't really love someone like me. I let my mother's poison infect my thinking because part of me was already afraid that you were too good for me. That's not true. It is true. You were this brilliant, compassionate woman who cared more about helping others than advancing herself. You volunteered at homeless shelters, tutored struggling students for free, and chose teaching because you wanted to make a difference. Meanwhile, I was the privileged son of a wealthy family who had never had to struggle for anything. Dawn stared at him. Is that really how you saw me? As someone who was too good for you? I saw you as someone who made me want to be better than I was, someone who challenged me to think beyond my own narrow world. And when my mother presented evidence that you were just like everyone else in my social circle, someone who saw relationships as transactions, part of me almost believed it because it was easier than believing I had found something real. So, you threw us away. I threw us away, Jim agreed, and I've regretted it every day since, but I won't make that mistake again, Dawn. I won't let my mother destroy what's left of our family. Dawn felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for 6 years. Our family? We are a family, whether we're together romantically or not. We share 2 incredible daughters, and we both love them more than anything in the world. That makes us family. And what about us? What about what we used to be? Jim was quiet for a long moment. I'd like to believe we could find our way back to that someday, but right now, the most important thing is protecting Lily and Rose from my mother's latest manipulation. Everything else can wait. Dawn nodded, feeling simultaneously relieved and disappointed by his practical response. So what happens next? Next, we prepare for battle. Margaret will file a response to the petition. We'll gather evidence of what an excellent mother you are, and I'll make it clear to the court that I support the girls remaining in your custody. And Elena? Jim's expression hardened. Elena is about to learn that there are consequences for her actions. I'm done protecting her from the results of her choices. As Jim prepared to leave, Dawn felt compelled to ask one more question. Jim, why are you doing this? Really? You could have your daughters in your life without all this drama if you just went along with Elena's plan. Jim paused at her door, his hand on the handle. Because 6 years ago, I chose to believe lies over love. I chose fear over faith. I chose my mother's approval over your heart. I won't make those same mistakes again. This time, I'm choosing you. I'm choosing our daughters. I'm choosing what's right, no matter what it costs me. After he left, Dawn sat in her quiet apartment and allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight. More importantly, she began to believe that the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago was still there, underneath the hurt and the years of separation. He was fighting for their daughters. But maybe, just maybe, he was fighting for them too. Chapter 8. Love Tested. The custody hearing was scheduled for a cold Monday morning in March, 5 months after Dawn had walked into Jim's office for that fateful job interview. As Dawn sat in the courthouse waiting room, watching her breath create small clouds in the inadequately heated space, she couldn't help but think about how drastically her life had changed. Margaret Chen, the family attorney Jim had hired, was everything he had promised, brilliant, fierce, and completely dedicated to keeping Lily and Rose with their mother. But even Margaret had warned Dawn that Elena's legal team was formidable and that the case would likely be decided on more than just the obvious fact that Dawn was a loving, capable mother. "They're going to attack your character," Margaret had explained during one of their preparation sessions. "They'll paint you as financially irresponsible, emotionally unstable, and unfit to provide for the girl's future needs. We need to be ready for anything." Dawn had thought she was ready. She had gathered letters of recommendation from the girls, teachers, testimonials from neighbors, and documentation of every sacrifice she had made to give Lily and Rose a stable, loving home. She had practiced her testimony until she could recite it without breaking down, and she had prepared herself for the emotional difficulty of having her parenting scrutinized by strangers. What she hadn't prepared for was the systematic destruction of her reputation that Elena's lawyers unleashed. The courtroom was smaller than Dawn had expected, with wooden benches that reminded her uncomfortably of church pews. Elena sat in the front row with her legal team, dressed impeccably in a navy suit that probably cost more than Dawn's monthly salary. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as if she genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. Jim sat beside Dawn at the defendant's table, his jaw tight with tension. He had barely spoken that morning, but Dawn could feel the anger radiating from him in waves. This was his mother trying to destroy his family again, and the betrayal cut deep. Ms. Kindheart, Elena's lead attorney, Victoria Sterling, began during cross-examination, her voice sharp as a blade. "You've changed jobs 4 times in the past 6 years, haven't you?" Dawn gripped the edge of the witness stand. "I was laid off twice due to budget cuts in the school district. The other positions were temporary, while I searched for permanent employment." "Ah, but the result was the same, wasn't it? Periods of unemployment when you couldn't provide stable income for your children. I always found work quickly. I never let my financial situation affect the girls' care." "Let's talk about that financial situation," Ms. Sterling continued, consulting her notes. "You currently live in a 2-bedroom apartment, is that correct?" "Yes. An apartment in a neighborhood where the median household income is 40%. Below the city average?" Dawn felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's a good neighborhood, safe, with excellent schools." "Is it safe?" "According to police reports, there have been 6 incidents of petty crime within a 2-block radius of your building in the past year." Margaret objected, but the damage was already being done. Dawn could see the judge making notes, his expression growing more skeptical with each question. "And your current monthly income, Ms. Kindheart?" Dawn stated the figure, knowing how modest it sounded in this sterile courtroom environment. "That's barely above the poverty line for a family of 3, isn't it?" "We manage just fine," Dawn said, firmly. "The girls have everything they need. Everything they need, perhaps. But what about everything they deserve? What about private schools, tutoring, music lessons, travel opportunities? Can you provide those things on your current salary?" Dawn's throat tightened. "Love and stability are more important than expensive activities." "Are they? Or is that what you tell yourself to justify the limitations you're placing on these children's futures?" The character assassination continued for what felt like hours. Dawn's student loan debt was presented as evidence of financial irresponsibility. Her decision to work part-time when the girls were infants was twisted into abandonment. Even her choice to keep the twins' paternity secret was used as evidence of deceptive behavior and poor judgment. By the time Miss Sterling finished, Dawn felt emotionally battered. She caught sight of Eleanor sitting in the gallery, her face carefully composed, but her eyes bright with what looked disturbingly like satisfaction. When it was Margaret's turn to present their case, she did so with the skill Dawn had hoped for. She called Dawn's supervisor at the hospital, who testified about her dedication and compassion. She called the girls' teachers, who spoke about the obvious love and security the children felt at home. She presented character references from neighbors and friends who had watched Dawn raise Lily and Rose with unwavering devotion. Miss Kindheart may not have unlimited financial resources, Margaret argued in her closing statement, but she has given these children something far more valuable: unconditional love, moral guidance, and the security of knowing they are the most important things in their mother's world. But it was Jim's testimony that proved most powerful. "Dr. Bremer," Margaret began, "what is your opinion of Miss Kindheart's fitness as a mother?" "Dawn is an exceptional mother," Jim said without hesitation, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "Despite facing challenges that would break many people, she has raised our daughters to be kind, intelligent, well-behaved children who feel completely loved and secure." "And do you support the petition for custody transfer?" "Absolutely not. The girls belong with their mother." Ms. Sterling's cross-examination of Jim was brutal. She questioned his judgment, suggesting that his romantic feelings for Dawn were clouding his assessment of what was best for the children. "Dr. Bremer, isn't it true that your mother has provided significant financial support throughout your life?" "Yes, she has. Your medical school tuition, your first home, startup costs for your practice?" "Yes." "And isn't it true that opposing her in this matter could jeopardize your relationship with her and your future inheritance?" Jim was quiet for a long moment. Dawn held her breath, knowing this was the crucial test. Would Jim choose his family's money over their daughters? "Yes," Jim said finally. "It could." "So you're willing to risk your financial security for Miss Kindheart?" Jim's voice grew stronger. "I'm willing to risk everything for my daughter's happiness and well-being, and their happiness depends on remaining with the mother who has loved and cared for them since birth. Even if it means they continue living in modest circumstances rather than the privileged lifestyle your mother could provide. Money doesn't create loving families, Miss Sterling. My mother's wealth didn't prevent her from lying to me 6 years ago. It didn't prevent her from keeping me from knowing my daughters existed. Financial security means nothing if it comes at the cost of separating children from the parent who loves them most." The courtroom was absolutely silent as Jim's words sank in. Dawn felt tears streaming down her cheeks at his unwavering support. Elena took the stand next, presenting herself as a concerned grandmother who only wanted to provide opportunities for her grandchildren. "I can offer them the finest schools, cultural experiences, travel," Elena said smoothly. "I can ensure they never want for anything." "And their relationship with their mother?" Margaret asked during cross-examination. "Ms. Kindheart would be welcome to visit regularly. I'm not trying to separate them from their mother. I'm trying to give them a better life, better than the loving home they currently have." Elena's composure flickered. "Love alone isn't enough to raise children properly. They need stability, opportunities, advantages that Ms. Kindheart simply cannot provide." Margaret's expression turned razor-sharp. "Mrs. Bremer, isn't it true that 6 years ago you fabricated evidence to destroy the relationship between your son and Ms. Kindheart?" The color drained from Eleanor's face. I was trying to protect. You hired actors, staged photographs, and convinced your son that the woman carrying his children was trying to manipulate him for money. You thought what, Mrs. Bremer? That lies were preferable to truth, that manipulation was an acceptable tool for getting what you wanted. Eleanor looked desperately toward her legal team, but there was no objection that could save her from her own history. Mrs. Bremer, if you were willing to go to such elaborate lengths to destroy your son's happiness once, how can this court trust that you won't use the same manipulative tactics with his daughters? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Elena's carefully constructed facade crumbled as she struggled to find an answer that wouldn't further damage her case. After 2 days of testimony, the judge retired to make his decision. Dawn, Jim, and Margaret waited in the hallway, the tension almost unbearable. When they were called back into the courtroom, Dawn felt like she might collapse from the stress. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, Judge Harrison began, his voice grave. This court finds several troubling aspects to this petition. While Mrs. Bremer's desire to provide for her grandchildren is understandable, her documented history of deception and manipulation raises serious questions about her motivations. Dawn's heart hammered against her ribs. Furthermore, this court has seen no evidence that Ms. Kindheart is anything other than a devoted, capable mother who has successfully raised her daughters under challenging circumstances. The children appear healthy, happy, and well-adjusted under her care. The judge's gaze moved to Elena. Mrs. Bremer, your willingness to separate young children from their primary caregiver based solely on financial considerations, combined with your history of manipulation in family matters, convinces this court that your petition is not in the children's best interests. Dawn felt Jim's hand squeeze her shoulder. The petition for custody transfer is denied. The children will remain in the custody of their mother, with existing visitation arrangements for their father to continue. As the gavel fell, Dawn nearly collapsed with relief. They had won. The girls would stay with her, but as they left the courthouse, Dawn felt emotionally and financially drained. The weeks of legal battles had cost her sleep, peace of mind, and money she couldn't afford to spend. I keep thinking about leaving, Dawn said quietly as they stood on the courthouse steps. Taking the girls somewhere, Elena can't reach us. Jim turned to her in alarm. Dawn, you can't run. We won. She can't hurt us anymore. Can't she? She tried to take my children, Jim. She put us through hell because she thinks money matters more than love. What's to stop her from trying again in a few years? Jim was quiet for a long moment, then his expression hardened with resolve. Me. I'm what's stopping her. I meant what I said in there, Dawn. I choose you and the girls over everything else. My inheritance, my family connections, all of it. And if she completely cuts you off, if you lose everything, Jim smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. Then I'll have everything that actually matters. As they walked toward the parking garage together, Dawn realized they had survived their first real test as a family. Elena's worst attacks had only made them stronger and more united, but the most important test was still ahead, learning whether the love that had brought them together could fully heal the wounds left by years of separation and betrayal. The custody battle was over, but the real work of rebuilding their relationship was just beginning. Chapter 9. The Proposal. 2 months after the custody battle ended, Dawn was beginning to believe that they might actually find their way to some kind of normal life. Elena had maintained a conspicuous silence since the court's decision, apparently finally understanding that her manipulations had permanently damaged her relationship with her son. Jim continued to be a devoted father, taking the girls every weekend and Wednesday evenings, building the kind of relationship with them that Dawn had always dreamed they could have. What surprised her most was how naturally the three of them had fallen into a co-parenting rhythm. Jim never questioned her decisions about the girls' bedtimes or discipline. Dawn never felt like he was trying to override her authority. They communicated about everything from school events to doctor's appointments with seamless cooperation. The only thing that hadn't been discussed was the future of their own relationship. There were moments when Jim lingered at her door after dropping the girls off when their hands brushed while helping with homework. that Dawn wondered if they were moving towards something more than co-parenting. But neither had broached the subject directly, both seeming afraid to risk the fragile peace they had built. It was on a Saturday afternoon in early April, while she was folding laundry and the girls were at Jim's apartment, that Dawn's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Dawn Kindheart?" The voice was professional, businesslike. "Yes, this is Dawn. Ms. Kindheart, this is Patricia Williams from Williams Real Estate. I have a client interested in purchasing your apartment building. He's authorized me to offer you $5,000 cash to break your lease early." Dawn sank onto her couch, confused. "Someone wants to buy my building?" "Yes, ma'am. The new owner is planning extensive renovations and would prefer vacant units. Can you be out by month's end?" Dawn's mind raced. $5,000 would solve many problems, but finding a new apartment on short notice would be nearly impossible in her price range. "Can I have time to think about it?" "Of course. I'll call back in a few days." Dawn sat staring at her phone, wondering who could want to buy her modest building and why they'd pay tenants to leave early. When Jim brought the girls home that evening, their excitement was immediate. "Mommy, Daddy Jim took us to look at houses," Lily announced. "Houses?" Dawn looked at Jim questioningly. "Just exploring the neighborhood," Jim said casually, but something in his expression made Dawn suspicious. "Can we live in a house with a backyard?" Rose asked hopefully. "Daddy Jim showed us one with a swing set." After the girls went to wash hands for dinner, Dawn turned to Jim. "What's this about looking at houses?" "I've been thinking about buying. Something in the neighborhood for when the girls stay with me." Something in his tone made Dawn even more suspicious. "Jim, what's going on?" "What do you mean?" "I got a strange call today. Someone wants to buy this building and is offering cash settlements to get tenants to move out early." Jim's expression didn't change, but Dawn saw something flicker in his eyes. "Jim." Her voice was dangerously quiet. "Please tell me you didn't buy my apartment building." "Okay, I won't tell you that." "Jim!" Dawn felt anger and panic surge. "You can't just buy the building I live in. You can't manipulate my living situation." "I'm not manipulating anything," Jim said quickly. "I made an investment in a property with good potential." "Coincidence? Really?" Jim ran his hands through his hair. "Okay, fine. It wasn't coincidence, but hear me out." Dawn crossed her arms. "Waiting. Your building is falling apart, Dawn. The heating system is ancient, the plumbing needs work, and the neighborhood statistics during the custody battle were concerning. You and the girls deserve better. That's not your decision to make." "You're right. But I thought if I owned the building, I could renovate your apartment specifically for you and the girls. Give you security of never worrying about rent increases or eviction." Dawn stared at him, overwhelmed by frustration and gratitude. "Jim, I can't be your charity case. It's not charity, it's me trying to take care of my family." The word family hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. "We're not," Dawn started, then stopped. "Jim, what are we doing here?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I know what I want us to be doing, but I don't know if you're ready to hear it." Dawn felt her heart race. "What do you want us to be doing?" Jim stepped closer. "I want us to be a real family, not just co-parents, but a real family. I want to come home to you and the girls every night. I want to help with homework and bedtime stories. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." Dawn's breath caught. "Jim, I know I have no right to ask. I know I hurt you badly, and trust doesn't just reappear. But Dawn, I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I was confused and convinced you had betrayed me, and I think you might still love me too." Dawn felt tears welling up. "Of course I still love you. But love wasn't enough before, was it?" "My insecurity was stronger than our love," Jim corrected. "My fear that someone like you couldn't really want someone like me." But I'm not that insecure. Young man anymore, Dawn. I know who I am now, and I know what matters. You matter. The girls matter. Everything else is just noise. And your mother? Your inheritance? Jim's expression hardened. I choose you over all of that. I've already spoken to lawyers about setting up education trusts for the girls from my own savings. As for my inheritance, Elena can leave it to charity. I don't want anything with strings attached. You'd really give up everything for us? I already gave up everything 6 years ago when I believed my mother's lies. I won't make that mistake again. They stood looking at each other, the weight of their shared history heavy between them. So what happens now? Dawn asked softly. Now, I ask you to take a leap of faith with me, Jim said. Trust that we can build something better than what we had before. And if I say yes, Jim smiled, then I ask you to come somewhere with me. There's something I want to show you. An hour later, after arranging childcare, Dawn found herself walking through Riverside Park, the same park where she and Jim used to spend hours talking about their dreams and planning their future together. Do you remember this place? Jim asked, as they approached a bench overlooking the river. Of course, we used to come here all the time. You brought me here the first time you said you loved me, and I brought you here the night I decided I was going to ask you to marry me, Jim said quietly. Dawn's steps faltered. What? That last week before everything fell apart. I sat on this bench thinking about how I was going to propose. I had it all planned. Bring you here at sunset, get down on one knee by the old oak tree. Dawn felt her heart breaking. Jim, why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that even before I knew about the girls, I was planning to make you my wife. It wasn't about pregnancy or responsibility. It was about love. They had reached the old oak tree, its branches fuller than 6 years ago. Jim stopped walking and turned to face Dawn. I know we can't go back, he said, but maybe we can go forward. Maybe we can build something new together. To Dawn's complete shock, Jim dropped to one knee right there under the oak tree. Dawn Kindheart, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for the years we lost? Dawn stared down at him, her heart pounding. Jim, do you have a ring? Jim smiled and pulled out a small velvet box. I do, but it's not what you might expect. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond, clearly vintage and well-loved. It was my grandmother's, Jim explained. She left it to me with instructions to give it to the woman who captured my heart completely. Dawn's vision blurred with tears. It's perfect. So that's a yes. Dawn looked down at the man she had never stopped loving, kneeling under the tree where they had shared so many dreams. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Jim. Yes, I'll marry you. As Jim slipped his grandmother's ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Dawn realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories survive the worst trials. When they finally broke apart, both crying and laughing, Jim rested, his forehead against hers. I love you, Dawn Kindheart. I've loved you for 8 years, and I'll love you for the rest of my life. I love you too, Dawn replied, and this time nothing is going to tear us apart. As they walked back toward home, toward their daughters and their future together, Dawn realized that they weren't just getting a second chance at love, they were getting the chance to build the life they were always meant to have. Chapter 10. Forever Family. 3 months later, on a perfect Saturday morning in July, Dawn stood in the small bridal room adjacent to the hospital chapel, smoothing the simple ivory dress she had chosen for her wedding day. This wedding would be intimate, meaningful, and focused on what truly mattered, the family they were creating together. "Mommy, you look like a princess," Rose exclaimed from her chair nearby, her own dress a soft pink that complemented her dark hair beautifully. "The prettiest princess ever," Lily agreed, carefully adjusting her small basket of flower petals. Both girls wore matching pink dresses with small crowns of baby's breath in their hair. Dawn had insisted on a small wedding. After everything they had been through, she wanted their wedding to be about love and family, not spectacle. The guest list included only their closest friends from the hospital, a few fellow teachers, and neighbors who had supported her through the difficult years. Notably absent was Elena Bremer. Jim had made it clear that his mother would not be welcome unless she offered genuine apology and acceptance. Elena had chosen pride over reconciliation. "Are you nervous, Mommy?" Lily asked, studying Dawn's face with perceptive eyes. "A little," Dawn admitted, "but it's good nervous, excited nervous. Like when we got to meet Daddy Jim for the first time?" Dawn smiled, remembering that day in the hospital. Exactly like that. A soft knock interrupted them. "Dawn?" "It's time," called Margaret Chen, serving as Dawn's matron of honor. Dawn took a deep breath, gathering her bouquet of lilies and roses. Jim's suggestion. "Okay, girls, ready to help Mommy get married?" Both twins nodded enthusiastically. The hospital chapel was small but beautiful, with stained glass windows casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. Dawn had worried that holding their wedding in a hospital might seem unromantic, but as she stood looking toward the altar where Jim waited, she realized it was perfect. This was where they worked together, where they had learned to trust each other again. Jim stood at the altar wearing a simple black suit, his face radiant with joy. Beside him stood Dr. Patterson as best man, and several colleagues who had watched their love story unfold. As the pianist began the wedding march, Lily and Rose began their procession, scattering rose petals with 5-year-old concentration. The small congregation chuckled as Rose stopped to wave at a familiar face, and Lily gently pulled her sister forward. Then it was Dawn's turn. She had chosen to walk herself down the aisle, a symbol of her independence and free choice to join her life with Jim's. As she moved toward the altar, her eyes never left Jim's face, seeing all the love and wonder that filled her own heart. When she reached the altar, Jim stepped forward to take her hand, and Dawn felt the last of her fears melt away. "Dearly beloved," began Reverend Martinez, the hospital chaplain, "we are gathered to witness the union of James and Dawn and to celebrate the family they have built together through love, perseverance, and faith." When it came time for Jim to speak his vows, his voice was steady but emotional. "Dawn," he began, looking directly into her eyes, "6 years ago, I lost faith in us. I let fear and doubt destroy the most beautiful thing in my life, but you never gave up. You raised our daughters with love and strength, and you gave me the chance to earn my way back into your heart. Today I promise that I will never let fear win again. I promise to choose love over doubt, faith over fear, and family over everything else." He turned to include Lily and Rose. "And to my daughters, I promise that I will never leave you again. I will be here for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every milestone. You are my heart, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you are loved." By the time Jim finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Dawn composed herself before speaking her own promises. "Jim," she began, her voice clear despite her tears, "you once told me that love isn't just a feeling, but a choice we make every day. Today, I choose you. I choose us. I choose to trust in the love that brought us together and the strength that carried us through everything that tried to tear us apart. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams, and to build a life with you that our daughters can be proud of." She looked at their daughters. "And to Lily and Rose, I promise that your daddy and I will always put you first, that we will work together to give you the family you've always deserved, and that our love for each other will only make our love for you stronger." The exchange of rings was simple. Jim's already given grandmother's ring and a matching gold band for him. As they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, Dawn felt the weight of their shared commitment. "By the power invested in me, Reverend," Martinez concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jim, you may kiss your bride." Jim's kiss was gentle, but filled with all the passion and love that had sustained them through years of separation. When they broke apart, the small congregation erupted in applause, with Lily and Rose clapping loudest of all. "I present to you the Bremer family, Jim, Dawn, Lily, and Rose." As they walked back down the aisle together, Jim carrying Rose and Dawn holding Lily's hand, Dawn felt complete for the first time in 6 years. The reception was held in the hospital's community room, decorated with simple white flowers and filled with laughter. Dawn danced with Jim to their wedding song while Lily and Rose twirled around them in their party dresses. "No regrets?" Jim asked as they swayed together. "Only one," Dawn replied, smiling up at her new husband. Jim's expression grew concerned. "What?" "I regret that we waited so long to get here." Jim laughed, spinning her around before pulling her close again. "Maybe we needed the waiting. Maybe we needed to understand what we were fighting for. I'm done waiting for our life to begin. I'm ready for everything, the good days and the hard days, as long as it's with you." 1 year later, Dawn stood at the kitchen window of their modest but beautiful home, watching Jim push Lily and Rose on the swing set in their backyard. The house wasn't large. A simple 3-bedroom colonial in the same neighborhood where Dawn had raised the girls alone, but it was filled with love and laughter. Jim had started his free clinic in the neighborhood, using his medical expertise to serve families who couldn't afford traditional health care. Dawn had returned to teaching part-time while completing her master's degree in education. Elena had reached out twice in the past year, once with Christmas gifts, once requesting a meeting. Both times, Jim had politely declined contact until she was ready to accept Dawn without conditions. The estrangement continued, but Jim no longer felt guilty about choosing his chosen family over his birth family. The girls, now 6 and thriving in 1st grade, had adapted to their new life with the resilience of children who finally felt secure. They adored their father, loved their house with its big backyard, and had seamlessly transitioned into calling Dawn and Jim Mommy and Daddy. "Daddy, push higher," Rose called from the swing. "I want to touch the clouds," Lily added. Dawn smiled, one hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. She had taken the pregnancy test that morning, and the 2 pink lines had filled her with profound joy. Their family was about to grow again. "Jim," she called from the back door, "can you come in for a minute?" "5 more minutes, Daddy," Lily pleaded. "I'll be right back, girls." Jim jogged toward the house, his face flushed from playing outside. At 32, he looked younger and happier than he had in years. "What's up?" he asked as he reached the porch. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. Something in her tone made Jim's expression grow attentive. "Good something or bad?" "Something. Good something. Very good something." Jim stepped closer. "Dawn, what is it?" Dawn reached into her pocket and pulled out the pregnancy test, holding it out to him without a word. Jim stared at the test for a long moment. When understanding dawned, his face went through shock, wonder, and finally pure joy. "You're pregnant," he whispered. Dawn nodded, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "We're going to have another baby." Jim dropped the test and swept Dawn into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried. "Another baby," he kept repeating. "We're going to have another baby." "Are you happy?" Dawn asked. "Happy? Dawn, I'm beyond happy. I don't even have words. The girls are going to be so excited to be big sisters. They're going to be amazing big sisters, just like their mother is an amazing mother." From the backyard, they could hear Lily and Rose still playing, their voices carrying on the warm evening air. "Can you believe this is our life?" Dawn asked, leaning into Jim's embrace. Sometimes I have to pinch myself, Jim admitted. After all those years of thinking I had lost you forever, sometimes I can't believe we made it here. We didn't just make it here, Dawn corrected. We built this, Jim. We chose this. We fought for this. This isn't luck. This is love winning. Jim kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Mrs. Bremer, he whispered. I love you too, Dr. Bremer, she replied, forever and always. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Dawn and Jim stood together on their porch, watching their daughters play and dreaming about the baby who would join their family. They had traveled a long, difficult road to reach this moment of perfect happiness, but every struggle had been worth it. As Lily and Rose ran toward the house, ready for dinner and bedtime stories, Dawn realized that this was exactly the life she had dreamed of all those years ago. It had taken longer than expected, and it hadn't come easily, but it had come perfectly, at exactly the right time, with exactly the right people. Some love stories end with a wedding, but the best love stories, Dawn thought as she watched her, husbands scoop up their giggling daughters, end with a family that chooses each other every single day forever.